3TFM.
Hello, my name's Cameron McMenamy and welcome to the Career Show on 3TFM. With me is Tommy Kelly. Today we're going to be interviewing Keith Salmon, who is a landscape artist for Irvine. So Keith, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much, Cameron and Tommy. That's brilliant. Thank you.
So we're just going to get started on your career. So just give an idea, what were primary school days like and what school did you attend?
Oh wow, that's a long time ago. I was born down in Epping in Essex back in 1959, and so early school days were in Epping in Essex, and I can't really remember that much of them really, though I do remember even at the really sort of youngest age, sort of 5, 6, 7, that kind of time, always liking painting. It had always been something from the very earliest age that I got something out of and really enjoyed. So, yeah.
And was there like any topics you were interested in? I mean, you've mentioned art being one of them. Were there like topics you were interested in your school days?
As I got older, sort of going up through into sort of secondary school, I was particularly interested sort of in geography, as well as art. Art was always there. And I think that was sort of, I've always liked the outdoors. My father was very keen on the outdoors. He was a kind of very keen walker and climber before I was born. He used to go from London with his mates up to North Wales and up to Scotland on walking and climbing trips. And so, from a very early age, he started to take myself and the rest of the family out into the hills. And we moved from London to mid Wales when I was 10. And so having that kind of sort of upbringing, regularly going out into the landscape, I think it was just a natural kind of thing that I then, as I started to sort of do geography at school, I got really interested in it, and geology, and I really enjoyed that subject at school. Interesting.
So we're going to come to our first piece of music today, which is Solidaire by John Martin. So what was the reason you picked this song?
Wow. Well, I first came across John Martin's sort of singing and songwriting back in, I think it would be the sort of mid 1980s, and the very first album of his was the album called Solidaire with this track on it, and it just sort of amazed me. His voice. I think I particularly like singers who use their voice almost like an instrument, and John Martin is one of these people. And I've been to see him a couple of times, and he was just amazing. And so I've always got at the back of the studio there, I've got a whole load of CDs, and there's a lot of John Martins there. And my wife buys a lot of John Martin as well. She's a John Martin fan. So I then had to, when you asked me to select a bit of music, I had to try and find just one song, and Solidaire just seems to be the
Well, let's take a listen to that track.
So the next question I think you've kind of answered, but what were the subjects you actually liked in school?
Yeah, the other thing that I also sort of got into, and sort of as I got older and got into the sixth form, I also did English, and I've always loved reading, and so English sort of literature seemed to be the thing to go for. And I think, sort of like, I suppose lots of people who do English lit at school, you read a lot of things that perhaps, sort of, I don't read now, but I think it got me into reading very broadly. And so trying lots of different authors, lots of different styles of writing at a relatively early age. And I've gone on, I just love reading. I'm obviously visually impaired now, but I now read audiobooks. And so that's something, again, that sort of I put down very much to sort of school and through English lit courses, being asked to read a big variety of stuff, and just finding out, how much amazing writing is done, and is being done at the moment. So yeah.
That takes us on to our next song. You picked Anything by Amy Winehouse. Why is that song so important to you?
Oh, I think there over the years, there seems to be so many great sort of musical artists who sadly have never really gone on to take their career to its full extent, and Amy Winehouse, one of these people, tremendous voice, fabulous songwriter, but such a shame that she died so young. And I've got a couple of albums by her, and I just think her voice is just wonderful, and the songs are powerful, and
very, very talented singer. Let's have a listen to one of her songs. Let's listen to Rehab. So I'm now going to go over to the next question. What was it like once you left primary school and you moved on to secondary school? What were those days looking back? What were they like?
Well, as I said, I enjoyed the some of the subjects that I did at school, but I must admit I didn't enjoy sort of secondary school that much. It was something that I kind of got through. I don't really know. They didn't really make too much of an impression, although obviously, going through and doing as it was in sort of down in England and Wales, it was O levels and followed by A levels in my day. That obviously, although perhaps I didn't appreciate it at the time, it did me a lot of good. It wasn't. It wasn't a bad experience at school, but it wasn't something that I said, sort of school days were great. They were there, and I went through them like, all my friends and stuff. But the school that I went to, it was Welshpool High School in Wales, and it was a pretty good school, standard comprehensive, but it was I came out of it, hopefully, sort of a reasonably sort of sound kind of person. I think it did me quite a lot of good, but I wouldn't say I enjoyed it that much.
So we come on to our next piece of music, which is Wish You Were Here by Pink Floyd. What's the reason behind this particular song?
Pink Floyd, again, when I look at the CDs that I have, the music I listen to, most of it dates back to the kind of the 70s, late 60s, and Pink Floyd again was another band which I became aware of when I was in, I suppose, 15, 16. Wish You Were Here again was just one of those tracks that I just sort of thought was just superb. I can't really explain. I don't have much knowledge about music, I'll be honest. It comes down to just things which I just really like, and a lot of the songs and some of them that we're playing today, they kind of, when I play them, they kind of remind me of times in the past. I think music really does kind of take you to where you first heard it, or certain situations, and Pink Floyd that takes me back. Finding Pink Floyd for the first time and playing it a lot, and again I still play it, although it's years and years old, but I think they're a great band.
Well, let's take a little listen to this track, shall we? So after you left school, Keith, what were your first jobs?
I left sixth form, and I'd wanted to go to art college, but my father, he wanted me, I guess like a lot of parents, they kind of think, well, you ought to have a proper job, especially if you want to go to art college. And so he wasn't so keen, or perhaps, not sure, perhaps it wasn't so keen, but he didn't think it would give me a very good career. And so he was in the print. He had been a printer all his life. His own father had been a printer down in London at News of the World. So, it was a kind of a family tradition almost, be a printer. And he, at the time that I finished sixth form, he announced that in the factory that he was working, that they had a couple of apprenticeships coming, and he said, why not apply? And at the time, I had no money, and I wasn't quite sure if I couldn't go to art college. I didn't really think I wanted to go on and do 3 more years of a very academic subject at university, and so the thought of suddenly being able to sort of learn something which would give me a good kind of future sort of job and get some pay, it was rather tempting. And so the first job I ever did, I took on this handbook. Well, it was a bookbinding apprenticeship in a firm called McDermott and Chant in Welshpool in mid Wales. And I did that for it. The apprenticeship should have been 4 years. And I did the apprenticeship for about 2.5 years. But during that time, although I quite enjoyed it and I was getting on well with it, I was becoming increasingly aware that although I was doing this, I really wanted to do art. And after 2.5 years of an apprenticeship, I've been doing a lot of painting in my off time, in my house or in my parents' house. And my father just came up to me one day, and I think he was aware that I wasn't particularly happy in the factory, and he knew that I wanted to go to art college. And he just came up one day and said, well, look, he said, I've been quite impressed by the paintings you're doing after you finish work. So if you can try and get into art college, he said, I'll support you. And so, yeah, I did 2.5 years of apprenticeship, and then I managed to get a place at Shrewsbury Art School to do a 1-year foundation art course. And so I left the print factory and started on my career as what hopefully now is an artist. Yeah.
That's fantastic. So everything just kind of fell into place, but it's really important that your parents obviously have something to fall back on, because we've all been there. We want to do something, like we want to be like an artist or a footballer after we leave school, but it doesn't always work out for us. So it was great that your parents actually put that in place, want you to do something, so you had something to fall back on, I suppose.
Yeah. We didn't, fully agree over the course of it. Yeah. But I think in the long run, it worked out really well. And even the fact that I had this kind of period of 2 and a bit years between when I finished school and went to art college, that was really important, because when I did go to art college, I realised how much I appreciated being at art college. Yeah. And I'd learned a lot through doing the job at the print factory, not just in practical terms as becoming a kind of bookbinder, but just the whole thing about working and what work actually means, and it also, it basically meant that when I went to art college, I had some savings, which was so important, because although we in those days we still had a grant, it was pretty meagre. Mm-hmm. And so the 2.5 years I'd spent in print meant that when I went to art college, I did have a little bit of spare cash, and that meant that it was a lot easier for me than I know some of my now colleagues who were at college with me. They were found it really tough because they were all short of money. So on a whole lot of things, it worked out well. Although, if you'd asked me when I was wanting to go to art college straight after sixth form and the old man was saying no, I'd probably agree. But in retrospect, it worked out well.
So now we're going to come on to our next piece of music, which is All Along the Watchtower by Bob Dylan. So,
what's
this?
Bob Dylan again. Now this dates back to when I was actually working in the print, because it was an apprenticeship. We used to get sent, myself and the other apprentice, to the Matthew Bolton Tech College in Birmingham on block release to do hand bookbinding college course. And the first month that we were there, we went into a bar, and on the jukebox was All Along the Watchtower by Bob Dylan, and I'd never heard of him before. And I just blown away by this sort of strange singer and the lyrics. And I went out with my next wage packet, and I bought a compilation of kind of fairly early Dylan. Yeah, I just think he's just keep listening to Dylan.
I must admit, he's a really distinctive writer. There are not many writers like that these days.
So let's listen to that track. So the next question we're going to ask you is, how did you actually become interested in art?
As I say, right from the youngest age, I would always love painting. And as I went through school, the art classes were always the thing that I really enjoyed the most. And it just seemed natural that I wanted to go to art college. And I think it wasn't just because I wanted to go to college or art college, it was because art college would then lead me into a career as an artist.
Yeah.
And so it's just, art has always just been, I guess it's been a passion from the earliest age. Yeah, sort of, again, when I was at school, I didn't just, do art when I went to class. I would, I'd be at home and I would paint and draw constantly.
Yeah.
And when I then did the apprenticeship, I was coming back after an 8 or sometimes 12-hour shift and going in my room and painting into the late evening, sometimes early hours of the morning, and then getting up and doing another shift. And I've always had that kind of drive when it comes to art. And
I think you really need that drive to really
yes,
make it, I believe.
Very, very much so. I've talked, about this with lots of people, and I know so many people who do art, and they're painters or sculptors, but they don't have the drive. And so often, sort of people I know and sort of knew from art college days, when you speak to them, and they quite often say, well, yeah, I do a bit of painting, but I don't really have the time. And so many people that I know who went to art college afterwards then found reasons for not doing art. And most of those, very reasonable. They needed a job, and then they got married, and then they had families. Oh no, we never really had time. And now they're all retiring. Now they're saying, I'm going to get a studio and I'm going to do some art. But when you ask a bit later, have you done anything yet? No. And I think being an artist as opposed to just a painter or lots of people can paint, and lots of people can make stuff, lots of people, play instruments and that. But to be an artist, in whatever form, you have to have that drive, and you have to be really passionate and put everything into it. It's hard work. You hear a lot of people joke and say, you go to art college, it's a real laugh, it's easy. If you don't want to work, go to art college. Not true. If you want to be an artist and you go to art college, you have to work really hard. And I just loved it. Being an artist, of course, it's not always about always doing good work. You have to do a lot of bad work to get to the better stuff. And I'm sure
you make a lot of mistakes along the way.
Yeah.
That's true. It takes a lot of mistakes, but you learn from them so that you can make things better.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. That's it. Yeah, you have to do that. If you think, that when you're making, I'm basically a painter. So, if you think that everything you do is good, then you're never going to improve. And I'm sure, musicians, songwriters, photographers, everyone who creates seriously, it's the same thing. You have to, make mistakes and learn from them. Hopefully, you don't always.
No,
sometimes you make the same mistake twice. But
the really amazing thing is you've got a very unique type of art. So how do you actually create your pieces, and is there anybody that particularly inspires you?
There's several painters whose work I admire. Leon Kossoff and Frank Auerbach are two British painters, London-based British painters. They're a bit older than me now, but they're still working. As far as I know, absolutely superb work. There's always sort of work that you see, and not just painting, but sort of writing and beautifully created work, poetry, music, and that inspires you to do sort of your own stuff.
So now we're going to move on to our next piece of music with someone called Miss Dynamite. So tell me about Miss Dynamite.
I can't even think when I first heard her first album. It must be 15 years ago. I'm not quite sure. It might have been the Jules Holland show. I saw it. I don't know. I just heard a track by this amazing singer-songwriter again. Yeah, I just went and found this album, and it's not really the kind of music I normally listen to. But again, I think it's repeated kind of thing, but it is just so good. Quality just kind of comes out of it. A great voice, very powerful lyrics. Again, not really what I would normally listen to, but don't know how many albums she made. I've got 2, and I played them quite a lot.
Well, let's have a listen to our song. This is a song of hers called "It Takes More."
So the next question we've actually got is, how did you actually get into landscape art? I know you'd said earlier on that you were really into the great outdoors. Was that a big part in your influence of that?
It is, although strangely for many years, sort of when I was at college and until I moved to Scotland, in fact, my art and my love of the landscape of wild places were kept very separate. I'd always, as I say, my father was a very keen hill walker and mountaineer, and when we moved as a family from Essex to Mid Wales, at the age when I was 10, he started taking me into the hills, and I just caught the bug. I walked with him to the age of 16, and then I started going into the hills with a schoolmate of mine, and I've been going into the hills ever since. But as I say, it's kind of strange that sort of while I was doing all this walking, mainly in Wales at the time, because that's where I was living, and I was going to art college, I wasn't actually sort of creating my art about the outdoors. My art in those days was very much about man-made structure and landscape. So I would spend hours sitting around great big construction sites with sketchbooks and just drawing all the machinery and all the reinforcing metal and all the structures of construction. And I would, I like scruffy bits of towns, and so I'd always find the scruffy bits, the old railway sidings, the back of buildings and stuff, and I would go and draw. I used to do a lot of outdoors observational drawing. But then I moved to Scotland with my wife, and we came up purely for the outdoors. And my wife's a nurse, and she got a job at Ayrshire Central Hospital, and so we live rather strangely. We came up for the hills. We live in what must be the flattest bit of West Scotland, but it's just been the best move I've ever made in my life. And I've moved around the UK a fair bit prior to coming to Scotland, so it's proved a great move. And when we got to Scotland, once we had kind of just sort of settled in, I started to go out with my wife, and I went and did a special mountain skills course at Glenmore Lodge, National Outdoor Centre in Aviemore. And by chance, I met a couple of people from Ayrshire there, one of whom is Stevie Browning, who I think is still the Sports Development Officer for North Ayrshire. And as I've said, I'm visually impaired, so I have to have a guide when I'm out on the hills. And Stevie for the course was my guide. And when I got back from the course, when it ended, he had just set up a new local mountaineering club for North Ayrshire Council people, and he invited Anita and I to join. And so I started to go out walking very regularly with him, along with another chap who I'd met, who was another helper on the course, a chap called Guy Hansford, who was a retired man from Troon. And so in sort of from sort of early 2002, we started to go out either with Stevie and the club, Anna Cregan, or with Guy Hansford. And although I was a pretty experienced walker, at that point, I wasn't too confident on doing the more serious stuff. And both Guy and Stevie and the club, they kind of realised that, you know, sort of that they could help guide me up the places we wouldn't normally go to ourselves. And over the years, we started climbing some of the big serious sort of hills in Glencoe and over on Arran, and doing some of the big scrambles and stuff. And that gave Nita and I more confidence to go out. We generally always go up to the far northwest of Scotland, Sutherland and Assynt in early May, and so over the years we've done some of the big hills up there. Reached the highest point on Anchella one year. We did a big circuit of Sleoch above Lochmarie, and so I just love the landscape, and all these walks. They just. Well, I was just experiencing so much. One of the first walks I'd done, both with Éanna Craig and Guy Hansford, he'd come along as well. And we had gone as a group and stayed at the bunkhouse at Crewe Station on the West Highland line. Mm-hmm. And it was the first proper winter walk I'd ever done, because there was snow there, and I never walked in snow. And Guy had assessed the conditions, said no, it would be safe to take a beginner up there, and he brought extra gear. Yeah. And we had this amazing day, and I've told people about this lots, but it was from the start, it was just a beautiful mixture of breaks of sun and cloud, and this great pattern of light and shade and colour over Rannoch. And then we got into the snow, and then it was an almost blizzard. And then we finished the day, and the weather had cleared through, and it was almost sort of clear blue skies with these bright winter colours. And that was the day when I knew that I had to use all the time I was starting to spend in the hills and put it into my painting. And that was the day when I became a landscape painter.
Amazing.
It must come with its obstacles as well, obviously, with you being visually impaired and things. So how do you kind of create your paintings? Is it a lot of it from your mind, or how do you actually go about constructing them?
Well, I have a little bit of sight, and so although everything is very fuzzy, and I find it difficult to judge sort of all the colours and difficult to judge scale and stuff, what I see is still incredibly beautiful. Yeah. And so I'm lucky in that I've always had a really good kind of memory of place.
Exactly, yeah.
And I can still take photos. You know, I get most of them with thumbs in, or I'm tipping the sea out, or I'm not a photographer, but I can still snap, especially now that, you know, it's all digital. You know, it doesn't really matter. You can just sort of click away. And I don't use photos. I don't copy from photos, partly because I can't really see them. But what I do is I use photos or bits of photos to kind of act as memory joggers, to try and take me back to when we were there. And so my paintings, I guess, they're best described as me trying to paint something about my experience of landscape rather than traditional views. You know, there are some of my paintings that you could look at, and you know, sometimes people come into my studio and they look and say, "Oh, that's so and so," and they're kind of fairly recognisable. But most of them are much more erring towards the abstract, and people will look at the labels and it will say, I don't know, view over Rannoch Moor, and they'll say, "Oh, I haven't been there, but I feel like I have." And that for me means it's working, because they're not trying to be accurate representations of certain mountains or certain landscapes. They're trying to be something about what it's like to be in these places. You know, perhaps when it's pouring with rain, or the wind's blowing a hoolie, and you know what it's like out in these places. And that's what my paintings are about. Or that's what they try to be about anyway. Must be a pain for my wife, who has to listen to me, but Scotland is just in a league of its own. It's something to do with the light. It's something to do with the fact that, and you know, you can go into hills in midsummer on beautiful days, and you can have a mountain to yourself.
And so before we come to our last piece of music, going forward, what you're hoping to do in like the future with your landscape art and taking your career to the next step, really.
Yeah, well, that's a good question, because the last little bit of sight I've got is getting worse, and so over the last few years, I've been trying to look ahead and thinking, well, what happens if I become totally blind? And I've been thinking, well, can I still work as a landscape artist? And so a few years ago, I was thinking about this, and I thought, well, maybe there's just a chance that I could in some way use sound to create my landscape work. And I was lucky enough, I was doing a big drawing project in the Harbour Arts Centre in Irvine in December 2014, and it gave me a lot of days of I was just stood in the gallery drawing, and it gave me a lot of time to think about this problem. And I was talking to my wife in the evening and saying, well, I'm thinking I might have to try and use sound in the future. But I'm not a very technical person, as you will have found when we tried to get this Zoom meeting together. And I said, I don't know how to do sound. I don't know anything about it. And she said, well, you're working alongside the gallery technician, Graham, who's a sound engineer. She said, why don't you ask him? And so I collared him one day, and I explained that I was thinking that I might have to use sound and try and add sound to some of my painting, and that I didn't know what to do. And I think he thought it was just such a crazy enough idea that he wanted to get involved. And so he lent me a sound recorder and just sort of said, well, next time you're out walking, start making recordings. He said, you have to learn by your mistakes. That was his advice. So that fitted very much in with my kind of thoughts on how I make my art. And he said, once you've got a body of recordings, come back to me. And he said, and we can take them into the recording studio and we can sort of look at them. He said, I can show you the kind of thing that we can do with the sounds that you've recorded. And so that would have been early 2015 when I first got the recorder. And since then I've gone on and bought my own recorders and mics and stuff. And so now when I go out walking, I used to sit and sketch sometimes, very loose, scribbly sketches because I could see so little, but sketches nonetheless. But I can't do that any longer. And so now my sound recorder is my sketchbook. So I go out and I instead of sitting and trying to scribble down sort of memories of what I'm, staring at when I'm on the hill, now I point the mic out and try and capture something of that wonderful feeling of space and wildness that you get in the hills. So over the last few years, we've been trying to create these pieces which are both painting and sound. So I go and make recordings. I then work with Graham in his studio and we mix them into a soundtrack. And then they've set up speakers and everything in the studio here. And then I play the soundtrack and I try and paint my memories of the place, but also my memories brought about from listening to the sounds. And then when we exhibit the work, the painting also has a soundtrack that plays as you're looking at the painting. Graham and Drew, who are the technical experts on this, they've created they've created a video version of the exhibition, which is now available on the Barony website. And that includes, again, some images of my standard paintings and drawings, and 3 of these quite long audio paintings.
And now we're going to come on to our last piece of music before we round it off. Captain Beefheart and his magic band. So just tell me a bit about what you like Captain Beefheart.
Oh, Captain Beefheart, again, goes back to college days. I used to lodge in this flat called Hawkins House, which was on the harbour side at Falmouth where I was at college. in Cornwall, and I shared it with a couple of other guys, and we all had long hair and beards, and it was a bit of a crazy student house. And one day, one of the other students, he bumped into this guy who had just turned up in Cornwall. He'd hitched down from London, and he had left everything flat. I don't know whether he split up with his girlfriend or what, but anyway, he had just left home. And he'd had to save or just bring, he could only bring a few of his LPs, because of course there was no cassettes or CDs or anything. It was LPs, big heavy things. And he had these in a bag alongside his rucksack. And my mate said that he'd come and stay in the flat for a few weeks while he found himself somewhere to live in Falmouth. And so we had use of his selection of LPs. And I'd never, ever heard of Captain Beefheart and his Magic Band before. But this guy had a copy of Strictly Personal, which is just immense. Again, just an amazing musician, incredible voice. Mm-hmm. And so from that point when I first heard this album, Strictly Personal, I had to get myself a copy, which I eventually found in a second-hand record place a few years later. And again, I've been buying the band's records ever since. Again, sadly, the main singer, he passed away a few years ago, but not before he created a huge body of work. And so, just a rather outrageous band at times, but fantastic.
Which will round off this week's programme of The Career Show. This is Upon the My Oh My.
This interview is brought to you by The Career Show, broadcast right here every Friday, 6 till 8 p.m, exclusively on 3TFM.